Well, I don't know these young people, where are they from Africana Studies? I want to get them up here so they can have at it with you. Okay? And I think, Mark, Dr. Davis, we're going to do some introduction? Yeah. Okay, great. I think that somebody needs Mark. Come on up.
Oh, we're shifting, huh? Yes. Okay.
You can say hi. We have time.
So is Jayla going to stay over there?
Yeah, she just has to like change the
I'm not mad at you, Sabian. I'm not mad at all.
Sit down for me.
You're such a gentleman.
Hi, nice to meet you, Jessica.
So clearly you see why I chose these students. But welcome. I'm so glad to have everybody here today, and I'm so honored to have met and witnessed Professor Angela Davis on our campus. Oh my gosh. So maybe 2 to 3 weeks ago, I was on a phone call with Javon Jackson about this event. And in the past, I had interviewed a guest, and the past chair had interviewed a guest, Cornell West and Sonia Sanchez, in that order. This time, he mentioned, like, maybe we should get the students involved. My response was, say no more, fam. If I had to assemble a 4-member Avengers team on this campus, it would be these 4 students here. For their tenacity, their bravery, their leadership, their sheer insight on the world around them. I'm so honored to share this space with you all of you. Okay, so let me just get to the introductions. Jessica Floyd, co-founder of Race Together, senior in politics and government and communications, and Africana Studies minor.
This time around, we have to be, I think, more determined. We have to recognize the extent to which structural change is needed. It's not just about assimilation, integration, it's about transformation. If you want to continue that conversation, someone can ask me a question.
Well, I actually do want to continue that conversation. So I'm glad you brought up the topic of assimilation. I also think that access is another issue that people tend to confuse with equality. And you said we tend to take the former for granted while the latter shock our conscience. If we simply demand or obtain equal access for people of color, women, LGBT identities, and other social groups and identities, how would we possibly be supporting a superficial variation of multiculturalism that allows this institution called America to supposedly transform itself and continue to function in the old way?
Right. Yeah, see, that's the issue. And somehow we've been led to believe that all we need to do is to create diversity. All we need to do is guarantee inclusion. Now, I'm not saying that we don't need diversity, and I'm not saying we don't need inclusion, but I think it's important to ask the question, inclusion in what? Inclusion in the old structures so that they function in the same way they used to? I mean, what kind of sense does it make for Black people or Latinx people or indigenous or Asian American people to be included in a society that is still structurally racist. And right now, given that there is a great deal of attention on sexual harassment, sexual assault, finally, this should have happened 1,000 years ago. But what kind of sense does it make to ask for the inclusion of women in a misogynist society, a society that remains exactly the way it was when it excluded women? So yeah, so I think, and I'm going to say this, I think we need revolutionary transformation.
I think you raised a great point about the person holding the former Obama seat. But how has the display of multicultural nationalism centered around choreographed patriotism, commodified patriotism, and choreographed nationalism led to the similar racial profiling and legal assaults of people of color with immigrant backgrounds? Specifically, the most visible to the naked eye of Trump, such as Arab Muslims, Southeast Asians, Latinx peoples, African peoples, and Haitian peoples of that descent resembled that so of the Bush administration post 9/11.
Yeah, it's you're right, and it's very important to remember that the Islamophobia that has fueled so much racism, and I think it's important for Black people and Latinx people and people who may, Islam has a presence in Black communities as well. But I think in general, it's important to recognize that Islamophobia has made the whole terrain of racism even more dangerous than it was before for everyone who's targets of racism. And I think you're absolutely right to point to the response after 9/11. Bush. Who would have ever thought that we could get a president who outdid George? I mean, I'm kind of thinking about my response back then, and it would have been impossible to imagine anything worse. And now, there's someone who just outright lies and believes that he can turn lies into truth.
But also the way that he uses patriotism and nationalism in the disguise of multiculturalism too. Like he's lowered the Black unemployment rate. He's making America safe with the wall. He's protecting us from these bad immigrants.
Well,
it's very similar to how Bush tried to equate like why we need Guantanamo Bay to protect us from these terrible sleeper cells.
But it's even more extremist. I'm not defending George Bush or anything, but the fact that Trump overtly calls for a return to a time when white supremacy was in vogue. That's the meaning of "Make America Great Again." It's like "Make America White Again." Make America white again. Make America completely misogynist again. There's no again. America's never been great. As a matter of fact, what has been important about the history of the last centuries is that there have been struggles, consistent, persistent struggles for freedom. And you were speaking about the ways in which the disparaging comments, rather, that he made about Haiti and African countries. And there's no way to imagine black freedom struggles in the U.S. without the Haitian Revolution. The Haitian Revolution was the start of it all. And I was saying last night that after making those comments, that he should read C.L.R. James' The Black Jacobins. But he doesn't read, you're right. You can't even suggest that he acquire more knowledge, because you know that he probably doesn't even watch educational television. He just,
We'll try picture books.
yeah. Well, and I think, focusing on the nationalism and that extreme patriotism to the exclusion of others. I personally think that we should begin now to challenge or question the nation as the most appropriate form of human community. The nation is a historical development. It hasn't always been around. And why is it that our loyalties have to be to nations? I think of myself more as an internationalist with global solidarities and global loyalties, with concerns about, for example, what is happening in occupied Palestine right now. And what is happening in South Africa. So yeah, thank you. That was a good question. But I better shut up because we go on and on.
You spoke a little bit about community engagement, and I want to know what your thoughts are on what intersectionality means to you and how you apply it to your activism, and how your advocacy, specifically about race, gender, and sexuality, have kind of overlapped and brought light to other people's experiences and validated other people who sometimes go invisible.
Yeah, I think that intersectionality. It's not an elegant word, is it? So I wish we could come up with but the idea behind intersectionality is that we think in a more complicated way. We think relationally. We think about connections. We don't assume that we can challenge racism over here without also addressing misogyny and male supremacy, and without also addressing issues of sexuality, issues of nationality. Because if we think in those terms, then as a book that was published, I think in 1981, pointed out, all the women are white,
Yeah.
and all the blacks are men, right? But some of us are brave. That's the end of the title. All the women are white, all the men are black. So it means that when we deal with issues of sexism, it becomes a white issue. It means that when we deal with racism, the focus is only on men. So, how do we think relationally, intersectionally, and how do we develop our organizing approaches in that way? I think that's, for me, that is the greatest gift of feminism. And not all feminisms, because not all feminisms are intersectional feminisms. And I constantly like to point out that glass ceiling feminism is not intersectional feminism. It's a kind of elitist feminism. And the metaphor itself, glass ceiling, assumes that there are some women who are at the very top of the pyramid. They're so high up that they're touching the ceiling. All they need to do is break through. And my friend Michael Bennett, and you know Michael Bennett from the Seattle Seahawks, who has a really interesting book about to come out. It's called Things That Make White People Uncomfortable. Anyway, yeah, he said, I'm concerned about the women who are about to fall through the floor, you know, to explore that metaphor. And I think, you know, that's an indication of the work that intersectionality can do.
Thank you. It's my last one for you. So what do you think about people wanting to create a separation between the experiences and struggles of the civil rights and the LGBT rights movements, considering many large and well-known civil rights movements from the Harlem Renaissance to now, for example, Black Lives Matter, were started and driven by Black LGBT peoples?
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And those civil rights veterans who argue that the term civil rights is debased when it is applied to LGBTQ communities. You know, they are replicating the same kind of discrimination that they were supposedly challenging. But I would also argue that if we look at the way in which the notion of civil rights has colonized our sense of what it means to struggle against racism. Civil rights, I mean, that was an important issue, but it wasn't the whole issue. It wasn't just about inclusion, getting back to inclusion and assimilation, and it was also about economic freedom. It was also about a whole range of other freedoms that can't be contained within civil rights. When we look at the struggles of LGBTQ communities today, and many people end up following the Black movement and seeing it as a kind of paradigm. And so the assumption is that you have to fight for inclusion, inclusion within the military, inclusion within other institutions. And I think that the more radical LGBTQ activists have demonstrated that it is possible both to ask for civil rights and at the same time be critical of the institutional frameworks. So you can say, yes, LGBTQ people should be accepted in the military, but then you have to challenge the military. And you have to say, actually what we should be doing is closing down the Pentagon. I mean, and the same thing with respect to marriage rights, because marriage rights are civil rights, right? But if we simply ask to be included within an institution that has this long history of violence and repression and capitalist ideology, So, yeah, marriage equality is important, but let's recognize that marriage is a capitalist institution primarily designed to pass property down from one generation to the next. And that the family, which is seen to be so sacred, has been the haven for so much violence. And we haven't even begun to recognize the extent to which gender violence, violence against children is an integral part of the family. So I think that kind of approach that allows us to be critical and at the same time be supportive. That's something else that feminism has offered us. The ability to work within contradictions and not to run away from contradictions, but to recognize that we can, like Audre Lorde said, dwell at the heart of the contradiction.
You know, it is close to 1 o'clock, and I appreciate all the possible questions, but out of respect, because she does have a very busy schedule, I did want to allow an opportunity for you maybe to say a final few words, but I do want to say publicly that last year when Sonia Sanchez was here, when she left, she and I kept in contact with her son, and I reached out to her about reaching out to you. And I want to make sure
She called me like 3 or 4 times.
At least. And she would say, Brother Javon, I'm going to get with her. I know she's going to, and you're in Brazil and you're in this place. So I want to make sure we just acknowledge her from wherever she is, because she really was a conduit to get you here. It was a great day. I know you want to diffuse what you've done and pass it around, and obviously it takes a whole lot of people, but I just want to make sure we give a real joyful noise for you for all the things that you stand for and what you've been doing.
Thank you very much. And we will meet again.